We're going to take things up a notch now, still enforcing the same requirement that the state field be filled in, but our approach will be more forceful. We're going to disable the Estimate Total button when the page loads and enable it again once a selection is made. To do this, we're going to listen to a different event, an event called DOM Content Loaded. We're going to listen for this on the document itself. So we're going to call document.add event listener, and the event we're going to listen for is DOM Content Loaded. This is the event that's called when the page has loaded sufficiently that the DOM is ready for us. The images might not have loaded. If we want that, we'd generally be using the load event. But DOM Content Loaded is what we can listen for when we just want to make sure that our form elements are ready for us to start adding event listeners to them and so forth. And for this, I'm going to just use an anonymous function that I can use to wrap a whole bunch of other code. So in here, I'm going to copy in my submit event listener. I'll leave my estimate total function defined down here. And now I'm going to start taking my actions on that estimate button. First, I'll save a reference to it, call it button estimate. We'll use document.getElementById. We'll pull its ID from the browser here. So I will scroll down here and inspect the element and pull its ID here in the developer tools. Now switching back to my code, I'll paste in that ID. So I have a reference to this button now, and I need to do some things here. When the page first loads, that state field is always going to be empty. So right away, I can disable that button. I'm going to use the disabled property, which is part of every button element. I'm going to just set it to true. This works just like checked on a checkbox. So when it first loads, that will be disabled. We'll save this and switch back to Firefox, reload, and try it. And there we go. Now I'm setting this at the JavaScript level instead of in the HTML because I'd want this button to still work if JavaScript were not available. Because presumably the way this store would work is I should still be able to submit this and maybe have the server do some processing and give me back an answer if JavaScript can't do it. So I'll let JavaScript take care of it in the course of all this other action here. Next, I need to add another event listener to that state select box. So I'm going to add another event listener. And what I want to do is check every time the value of that state box changes. So I'm going to use the event called change. Once again, I'll pass in an anonymous function here. And inside this function, I'm going to see what the current value of state is, just like I did down here. So I'll actually copy this little block, bring it up here. And this time, if the value of state is empty, I'm not going to spawn an alert. I'm going to disable that button. So I'll copy this line as well. Copy and paste this here. And if there is a value selected, I want to make sure that the button is no longer disabled. So I will set disabled to false. And I will save this. And now I should note that I originally saved the value for the state button down here in this estimate total function, which means that no other functions other than this one can see this value. So I'm going to cut this, take it out of this function, and put it up here just inside my DOM content loaded function. So I know it will be available once the DOM is ready. And because of where that's defined, I need to move my estimate total function into the scope of this handler as well. Now I can save that, and I think we're good to go. We'll switch back to Firefox and reload. I'm actually going to trim off these URL parameters first. Reload, and we'll give it a shot. So I can see that this estimate total button is disabled. I get a little cursor hint from Firefox to that effect. And now as I change this value, the button is enabled again. On and off and on and off. So that's working great. Wrapping your code that needs the DOM to be ready in a DOM content loaded listener like this is generally going to work really well. But there's one small gotcha to be aware of. If you have tons of scripts loading on the page, DOM content loaded might already have fired and been caught by a different listener, so yours might get skipped. I have to admit, I haven't seen this myself, but the Mozilla documentation mentions it, so I feel obligated to pass it along to you. If you're using a framework like jQuery that offers its own version of this, It's called the ready function there. Gotchas like this will be handled for you. This step is now finished. We've seen how to take action once the DOM is ready for us, and disabled the Estimate Total button when there's no state selected, turning it back on when a selection has been made.